Oppenheimer.
So at a time when the world is on edge about nuclear anxiety, Christopher Nolan decides to make a movie about what? The bomb. The bomb.
As Oppenheimer helped in the creation of the bomb.
But I'll tell you what, when I was a kid, it was the same story. The same bad guys, the same weapons, the same fears. Try not to get yourself in too much of a tizzy about the whole thing.
Anyhow, that is not the main focus of this. This is more of a review, and it's probably going to contain some spoilers, but I'll try to keep that to a minimum. But I'm not sure how much you could spoil a movie that's based on real events. I've got a confession to make. At the beginning of 2023, I made a YouTube short that went viral, and it's millions and millions of views. And I supposedly mispronounced Oppenheimer. I'm from Vancouver, and the second mayor of Vancouver, his name's David Oppenheimer. But everybody in Vancouver who's from Vancouver, we say Oppenheimer. Now, in the movie, there's a scene that mentions Robert Oppenheimer has multiple pronunciations of his name. So there. Anyways, the guy was involved in creating something that will most likely destroy us someday. And the worst thing you can think of is the way someone pronounces his name. Anyways, on to the movie. Christopher Nolan's much-hyped epic finally arrived, and I went to go see it in 70mm in a local theater that's close to me that I've been going to since I was a little kid. The last movie I saw there was Dunkirk in 70mm. 70mm at the height of its day was quite breathtaking because the amount of detail and the scope of the screen and the image was a lot different than 35. The main thing I was worried about was that whether or not I'd be able to understand what they were saying. And I'm pleased to say that the audio, at least the dialogue, I was able to hear everything. Nolan, he's an ex-cameraman, so he knows when it comes to visuals, but he has a really strange sense of the audio spectrum, and the sound mixes of a lot of his movies are really, I almost want to say, bad. I saw Interstellar in the theater in IMAX, and it was really hard to wrap my head around the sound mix. I didn't see Tenet in the theater, but when I watched it at home, that was one of the most frustrating experiences I've ever seen watching a movie. Whereas the second time I watched it, I turned on the subtitles and I enjoyed it because I knew what the characters were talking about and the stakes that were involved. But when it comes to the sound mix with Christopher Nolan, like I mentioned before, I don't know if he's got an inability to hear a full range of frequencies because he really likes to have the sound mix in the upper mid to high frequency ranges. And then when those moments get loud, it's ear piercing. It's not like your seat is shaking. Your ears are actually hurting. And he doesn't like a lot of the low end in the sound mix, unless the theater got it wrong. But I've seen his other movies. Interstellar was similar. I was expecting it to be the space movie where my seats would shake, but it didn't. It was more like he likes to have the music really high in the mix, and he likes to have the mid to high range. And what that means is the more high trebly sounds, he likes to have that. I don't know if anybody's ever done some analysis about the frequency ranges of his sound mixes. It would be interesting to see. But I am pleased to say that you can hear all the dialogue quite clearly, which is a nice surprise from a Christopher Nolan movie. The photography, of course, is beautiful. It's by Hoyte van Hoytema, who shot the last few films for him. And this guy is like an amazing photographer. And a lot of the film was shot in a new black and white film stock, which he got Kodak to devise for him because no film in this scale has been shot in black and white for a long time. And during those scenes, I felt like he was going back to his roots. He's giving a nod back to his first film, Following, I think was a black and white. But there was a few problematic moments in a couple of scenes where it was mostly the scenes with Robert Downey Jr. sitting in a smaller room talking. And a lot of time the focus went soft and he went out of focus, because I know they're probably dealing with a really shallow depth of field. And a lot of times that's on the actors. It's not the camera crew. What are you going to do? Tell Robert Downey Jr. to hit his marks? When you got somebody of that caliber, you're probably not, because when you look at the behind the scenes of Iron Man, a lot of times he was calling the shots. So whether or not this was the case, it doesn't matter, because going past the photography end of things, the story and themes, Fat Man and Little Boy, which was, I believe, in the 80s. I was a kid when I saw that. I remember at the time it came out, and some people who were really big history buffs were looking forward to it, and they loved it. But the film critics panned it. They didn't like it at all. And that was more of a straightforward telling of all the technical details about the making of the bomb. There was a lot of trial and error. So Fat Man and Little Boy was really cheesy in a way, like the scene where they discovered implosion was a viable option. It's a guy looking at an orange and suddenly he's like, implosion. It was cringy. So I think a lot of people are expecting this to be like a remake of that movie, but it's not at all. Christopher Nolan, you usually see him in a nice suit on set or in interviews with the white shirt. I have a feeling during Tenet, he put on some cargo shorts, some Crocs, and a tank top, and that was his way of letting loose. Tenet was this overindulgent mess that a lot of people didn't like. Even some of the biggest Nolan fans, they turned their back on it. They were just like, okay, this is too much. Whereas Oppenheimer, he's down back to earth, and Oppenheimer is nothing like the cargo shorts Christopher Nolan. This is a very serious drama. There's all this hype about it being shot in IMAX and all the formats. And I noticed that Nolan has been out more than usual promoting the film himself, doing appearances with Robert Downey Jr. and even on like TikToks and such, you'll see him. So he's really trying to push this because I think he knows that people are going into this expecting this gigantic, loud epic, which in some ways it is, but it's a huge film, but it's actually a very serious drama, a very adult movie. And I don't mean that in a dirty way, despite all the reports about the nudity. It is just a very intense human story about a very complex, conflicted man, a very strange man. Nolan, with a movie like Interstellar, where the main character is striving to be an explorer in a world of ignorance. That was probably one of the only things that bugged me about the movie, is McConaughey's character was just so adamant that mankind has places they should or could go in order to prolong mankind's existence. Whereas I have the feeling that Nolan is more of he's got a lot in common with McConaughey's character. So he probably has the kind of same inclinations towards Oppenheimer. And this is a similar type of thing where you got a guy who's striving to go to where mankind shouldn't. In this case, the destructive nature of a bomb. And so like I mentioned with Interstellar, man is an explorer, not a steward. We're meant to live in the stars, which is probably not really feasible, but that's not going to stop a Chris Nolan protagonist. And what Oppenheimer focuses on is, of course, it's going to be about the inner conflict of Oppenheimer as a Chris Nolan protagonist. It's mainly focusing on the anti-hero in a way, and it's really lightning fast. Like, it goes a million miles an hour through the whole movie. It still feels a little long, but there's never any real moments where there's not serious drama going on and conflict. The whole movie, of course, it's about the days of World War II, and everybody was on edge. Every scene is infused with that anxiety and the moral dilemmas that everybody was having, and most of them are all these physicists around the world who are suddenly scattered across enemy lines, and the Manhattan Project was struggling to make sure that they can get some of the greatest minds. And so the beginning of the film starts off with mostly Robert Downey Jr., and you get a little confused at first, not sure exactly what's going on. Robert Downey Jr. gives an amazing performance in this. We see him as Iron Man, but a lot of people remember him as the Oscar winner for Chaplin. He's a pretty high caliber actor when he's given the chance, and this is one of those opportunities where he's really flexing his muscles, and he's great. Like, if he doesn't get nominated, I'd be really surprised. Florence Pugh, you know who I'm talking about. She's really good, and she's another one who, when you watch her in Midsummer and a few other things, you know she's one of those rare talents. And yeah, in this, again, you see that side of her where she can be really intense, and it's hard to believe she's in like the Black Widow Marvel stuff when she's capable of this type of like range as an actor. And overall, the cast was amazing. You just keep seeing familiar faces throughout the whole movie, even in small roles. both old and new. There's a bunch of new faces of new actors that you don't know who they are. A lot of European actors you recognize from other movies. And a lot of the new faces, you're like, who is this? They're really good. It's a real interesting exercise from Christopher Nolan, bringing together all these classic actors, and he's like introducing new ones. It's almost like what a lot of the big-time directors like Spielberg would do and Coppola, all in the past, right? You would see them introducing all these new actors, and then they go on to become stars. So I have a feeling a lot of faces in there 10 years from now are going to be really familiar. Anyhow, so we've talked about the camera, we talked about the sound, we talked about the cast, the story, Robert Downey Jr., and the movie itself is, like I said, it's an intense drama. And if you're expecting a blow-by-blow account of exactly how the bomb was made, you're not going to get that. Like, the way the movie starts is Oppenheimer's thinking about his days as a student, and he lost his mind, where he became obsessed with what happens to a star when it dies. And that pretty much says what you need to know about the theme of this movie, is that Oppenheimer, he finds out what happens to a dying star by what happens in his own life and in his own mind, and the effects that it has on all the people around him. In the public eye, the way the USA presented him was he was the father of the atomic bomb. And you can argue that all you want. He was on the cover of Time magazine with those words. So you can argue in the comments, but whatever, man. And so the movie's theme was expected, where maybe some people don't want to sympathize with him, and you don't really, because you can see that he's not the nicest guy. He's quite strange, and at least the way he's presented in this movie. And he spent a lot of time justifying what he did, only to turn around and see that the potential of where mankind would go. So this kind of counters the themes of Interstellar, where Matthew McConaughey just goes into space because he thinks that's where mankind belongs, even at the expense of his daughter. And this is not that quite. It's almost like Nolan has taken a step back from that position, and he shows Oppenheimer as a man conflicted, of course, who wouldn't be, but who sees the potential of what was in his mind and how it will affect the world. And this is the guy that created a technology which is the basis of all our anxieties for the next foreseeable, probably for eternity, because this is something that even when it's not a bomb, it's something that stays around long after we're gone. It's quite a huge philosophical question, and it's basically the question for all mankind and what we do to preserve our borders, but yet is the potential to bring down the entire world as is. And the ending is, I don't want to spoil it, but that ending was absolutely fantastic. Overall, Nolan, he likes to treat his stories as almost like a musical composition, and it's like the steady beat going through the whole movie. The editing has a certain rhythm to it, and then it all builds to this massive crescendo at the end, and it's this overwhelming assault of the senses. And I'm not talking about footage of a bomb or anything. It's an emotional, intense interactions at the end, and you just finally see Oppenheimer in a very subjective shot. Most of the shots of him are subjective, where the camera's directly in front of him, and you just see him having this dilemma, like probably the grandfather of all dilemmas of anybody who's ever lived. And I don't feel sorry for the guy, but it's just one of those things that happens. And so the way the movie ends is like this ultimate, it's like the orchestra is hitting their loudest notes in this crescendo of a tragedy. And American Prometheus is it's a book that this is based on. And so, yeah, that's my thoughts on it. It's an amazing movie. It is definitely, is it Christopher Nolan's best? Yeah, I would say so. As in terms of a serious drama, the previous one was Dunkirk, and people really thought that was going to win Best Picture. And I love Dunkirk, but my personal favorite of his is The Prestige. But that's not serious Christopher Nolan. This is about as serious as a movie gets. The subject matter. There's a whole bunch of questions about morality and how a man serves his country, and then how the country turns on him when they're done with him, basically, right? And I can say one thing for sure: this is the best screenplay that Nolan has done. And a lot of it is interesting, where you have these really good lines and this fast, kind of quick back and forth dialogue, almost like an old 40s or 50s movie at times. And then at other times, it's just a very subjective movie about Oppenheimer's, what's going on in his mind and his soul. It's a future classic, and it really raises a lot of questions. And yeah, it's very intense, and it's not going to break the box office records. And a lot of people are going to go into it expecting a lot of fireworks, but it's not technical fireworks. It's not a lot of footage of mushroom clouds. Let's just say that. And how they filmed that one scene, I still don't know, but I'm sure we'll find out soon, because if he didn't use any CGI, yeah, I'm curious to know. But anyways, yeah, Christopher Nolan at his best, at his most adult, and don't expect a blow-by-blow account of what it takes to make a bomb. Be prepared for asking yourself why we do what we do as humans. And for a movie to do that is pretty impressive. Film Dweeb, out.
This has been a Watson Street Studios production. Make sure to visit filmdweeb.com and to subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Film Dweeb 76. Thanks for listening.